everyone, welcome back. Today, I have the pleasure of having a conversation with Dave King. Dave and I met at an event. Well, we met first during the prep for an event, but we were having a conversation with the Women in Change Network, and we were doing a panel with a bunch of other people, and we were talking quite widely, putting the world to rights around things like, the impact of AI on society and ethics and all of these kinds of things. So we might expect the conversation today to take some of that kind of flavor. But before I go into that, welcome, Dave.
Yes, thank you for having me. Hi, so I'm Dave King. I'm the MD of Differentis. We are a management and technology consulting business. We are 25 this year. And yeah, it'd be great to have some conversations around AI. We've seen a lot of technology changes over those 25 years, and this is the latest one. It's got lots of potential, but like all things, there's no right and wrong answer with a lot of this. I think we need to have the debate and discussions and see where we end up.
Absolutely. So let's start off where we left off. Where we left off on the panel that we were doing was we had some big topics to discuss, and we were talking about things like the impact on not only companies, but the impact on society. I remember having one question from the audience on the ability to replicate somebody's digital identity and things like that. So I'm seeing a lot of big questions, a lot of curiosity, and people in society generally, not just in organizations, starting to think more widely about what the use cases could be and what the impacts could be on us. One of the impacts I see professionally is the potential for roles that we used to have maybe not being required anymore, and us coping with some of those things, not only conversationally, but asking ourselves these big questions. What kind of things are you seeing, Dave, in the curiosity side of things as we start to consider what the societal impact or the organizational impact of this new technology disruption?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it comes down to a lot of conversations, as you've said, are around, where does technology start potentially getting us to, I would say, rethink jobs rather than replace. I think, yep, there will be jobs today that won't exist in the future, just like 30, 40 years ago, there were jobs then that don't exist now. We can see it as a threat, and we can start panicking and going, what we're going to do about these things. But if I look at it, let me give you an example. I was working with a friend of mine over in Switzerland, and he has an AI company, and they were working for a national dentistry organization. And what they were looking to do was to say, can we get AI to look at a lot of our dentist x-rays and scans and things and start picking up things that we might be missing as humans? So they did the work. And when they came back, they said, actually, yep, do you know what? We can get AI to do this. It's going to be somewhere in the region of 70% accurate. Now, with it being technology, the initial response was, can't possibly do that. It needs to be well over 90%. It's got to be perfect because it's technology, therefore it must be perfect. Long story short, they finally got the client to let them do a study on the human performance at this organization, and they found actually they were around 40% accurate. So you nearly doubled accuracy. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better than it was. And what they found then was it freed up people's time to go and do other activities that they often didn't get time to. So imagine in that type of environment, they had more time actually talking to patients, explaining to them what they need to do, what's going on, how they're going to help solve the pain they're in or anything else that they're doing. They didn't need to be spending the amount of time they were spending on looking at the various x-rays and the scans. And I think that's where what I'm seeing in a lot of organizations is where AI becomes powerful is how can it churn through a lot of that, I don't necessarily say mundane, but a lot of those tasks that can be very manually intensive to free up the human capacity either to be more creative or to have more human connection, whether it be with other clients or patients or whatever that is. So I think if we can rethink the jobs we have today, I think we could be into a good place. I don't know, what are you seeing in some of your world?
So I'm seeing this conversation happen, and some of these things where we say it frees up people's times to do other things, to be more creative, to build relationships, to solve problems, to wax lyrically on the impact of this on humanity. Whatever it is, right? We're saying that people can go and do these things. But my doubt in this kind of space is and this is a classic problem for learning and development organizations generally, is that we have this utopian idea which is unrealistic. And that utopia is that every single person who works would be creative, would be able to solve problems, would be excellent at building relationships. And these kinds of attributes are normally distributed. So we have some people who are great, some people who are very bad, and some people in the middle who are varying degrees of good at this thing. And the reality of this conversation is that we might be able to free up people's time to do more creative things, but we might have varying levels of productiveness, varying levels of creativity with that time, which eventually does lead to some displacement, particularly where people have had the jobs for many years where they haven't had to do any of this stuff because they have been focusing on the repetitive tasks, the manual tasks that you're talking about. So that's where there is cause for concern, because with those folks who maybe aren't so adaptable, what did they go and do? Because they are a large proportion of the population, right?
Yeah, and that's a valid point. I guess part of my thinking there, though, is some of this comes down to choice. Right? Now we could sit there and we can go, oh, yeah, I'm not creative. I'm not a people person, except. But like I said, if we look 50 years ago, 100 years ago, to the type of humans we were then and the jobs they were doing, most of us today wouldn't have survived in that world. You know, it was a very different environment. Over the course of whether it be our parents or our grandparents or ourselves, we consciously or subconsciously made a decision to change and put the effort in to change. I think, as with everything, there are going to be those that see opportunity, and there are going to be those that look at it as a challenge, and there'll still be ones that will sit there and unfortunately do very little, and then ultimately get passed by as AI comes on. And I think, as you remember from the panel we did a couple of weeks ago, you know, I'll always use my Charlie and the Chocolate Factory example, the Johnny Depp version, rather than any
Oh,
others.
no. We can talk about that in a second.
Charlie's dad at the start of the film had a job of putting caps on toothpaste. The robot came and replaced him, and at the end of the film, he got a job fixing the robot that replaced him. There are different ways we can look at this, and it's not saying it's always going to be right and there's not going to be any challenge. I think it starts with having the debate and people, as you said, being curious and being open to how do I need to change to make best of myself and my children in the world that I think is coming.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because it opens the door to another conversation, right? And that is, I, as an individual existing in a world that has changed, almost I will go on a hero's journey of my own, which is one of the classic models of storytelling. And I'll go on this journey, and there will be a normal world which is to some degree changed. I can take up that call to action and go on my own quest and better myself, or I can refuse the call to action. And we will always get people who will refuse that call. We will always get people who will accept that call, but maybe will fail in the face of adversity. And we will get people who will succeed all the way through to the end of the quest. So that's the nature of people. I think the difference, though, is you started by saying, you know, we've seen changes, we've seen automation, we've seen disruption happen in the past. With this particular disruptive revolution, we're coming to a point where we have technologies that will be able to do things better than people. Your point about accuracy is a great one. So the question is this revolution the same as previous, or is it somehow different?
Good question. Good question. I think it's a difficult one to answer as well, because we live in a world right now where so much of everything we see and hear, and I'm not going to get political or anything like that today, but everything seems to be so black and white now. Everything's soundbited. It's kind of, this is right, that's wrong, bish, bash, bosh. Some of it comes down to choice, right? So I'm just looking over your shoulders there, your guitars. Now, technically, AI already exists that can create music. Doesn't mean we choose to listen to it, and it doesn't mean we choose to like it. We still do things because, you know, as human beings, we are built to experience certain things. AI absolutely has the potential to be a real big shift compared to what we've seen probably over the last 10, 20 years. You know, this is definitely feels like potentially the biggest one, but it depends whether people debate it. How much are people going to go, yep, it's all good, or yep, it's all bad, or right or wrong? It will be a success for all of humanity if we engage in the massive grey areas around it. It will be a success for the people who want to make money out of it. in the short term if we allow ourselves to get pulled into this soundbite world we seem to live in.
You see, on your point on AI music, of course, I'm going to pick up. We talk about that for a second, right? So I've used Suno. I don't know if anybody who's listening to this knows what Suno is, but go and look it up. It's an AI music generator. Now, there are a couple of points of nuance which are very interesting about Suno. You can look at the terms and conditions and who owns what when you use it, who owns what when you put your own creative thought, your lyrics, for example, you put that in there. But there's a difference between music and music, right? Just like there's a difference between art and images. Now, if I split up my perspective on music for a second, so we have, first of all, as a listener, the things that I listen to, I dissect all of the different parts that are happening and I get pleasure from each of those parts. The drums are doing this. The hi-hats on this particular point were particularly rhythmic, the chug of the rhythm guitar, whatever it happens to be. And it evokes, obviously, an emotional reaction, but it also evokes an intellectual reaction for me. Anyway, some people listen to the lyrics. We can replicate some of the patterns that we've seen in previous music. That's a training data set, and we can apply AI in the broader sense, generative AI or pattern recognition to this, and we can figure out, well, this is what a typical chord progression would look like. So if we think about all of the corporate music out there, the little soundtracks underneath the videos that corporations use to put their services out there, it's all canon. The chord progression that we all hear at weddings, it's that, right? So you would have something that's in D major, you maybe have a B minor in there, and then you go through the fairly standard chord progression of G's and A's with that. It's all that. All of it. Corporate music is all that one thing. You go to Suno, you can replicate that very, very easily. I've done it a couple of times. The intro to this podcast, I did that. Didn't record it. I just put in a few things into Suno, and there it is. Now, that's something that you hear that is kind of background music. Maybe it accompanies a voiceover. Maybe it accompanies some other kind of information. Maybe you listen to it on its own, and that's fine. But we shift to the other end of the spectrum, and we start to think about music as a creative expression of angst, of things that are happening in society. I always use the example of Nirvana, right? That was a band that spearheaded the Seattle sound, the grunge movement, which was some kind of social rebellion against the music that was happening before, some kind of shift, an expression of novelty, an original thought that was manifest in music. We have the same thing with art. So we see an image generated by Midjourney, by DALL-E or Sora or any of the newer models that are currently available to us. Is that the same as seeing the Mona Lisa or something? The difference between an expression of thought, an expression of culture, and an image, they are different things. So the original thought, the creativity, that kind of thing, probably we're not going to get that if we're training a model on previous data, because the next new thing maybe won't come from there. What do you think about that?
If you take that thought process and then you apply it to business, you get an interesting conversation, because then you say, well, if I am plugging AI into my company, and I run a consult business, right? You run a consult business. There's lots of consulting businesses out there. If we all plug AI into our consulting business and say, right, that's it. We've plugged AI in. We're going to do all this stuff. It's going to be much faster. But it's trained on the same information. It's trained on history. So where's the competitive advantage? Where's that little spark makes your company compared to one of your competitors? And it's a great example there when you talk about the music and art, when you apply it across to business. But actually, business, whether you are a for-profit, a not-for-profit, whatever else, you still exist in a competitive landscape. Even if you're a charity, there are multiple charities for cancer. You are still, in effect, competing with other people to get access to a value exchange. We'll call it a value exchange, not just cash. The fair value exchange. But it's what makes you compared to them going to someone else. It's the same in relationships and everything else. I think from what I've seen so far in AI and from what I understand from this conversation so far, when you look at those more repetitive tasks, you can say, look, 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 = 2. Now, you can't extend that into, as we've seen, into the developer space, whereby you've got AI supporting developers to be quicker. We've got consultancies like ourselves looking at tooling that says, how can I, in effect, 10x a BA or a PM? So, i.e., how can I take a single resource and get them to do what I would have had 10 people to do in the past? Those things you can do. but you still need that creative brain space or that uniqueness that says, but the way we've done that is different to someone else. So you might have two consultancy firms that say, we can both X our BAs, for example, but we can do that by using AI tools plus our own experiences, our own knowledge, our own creativity to say, but the way we're going to do it is we're going to focus on this part of the BA lifecycle, and that's where we're going to deploy AI. We're going to use the human brains around here. Now, someone else might do a different job. So you've still got that originality. You both use AI, but you've still got different results, different responses. And then it's a conversation with the client. And this is back to how consultancy has been for the last few years. The real challenge of AI helps us, hopefully, to stop having conversations on day rates and start having conversations around what outcome are you after? How we go about achieving that outcome with you will be different to consulting company A, B, and C. You need to make a choice, client, on which one you're going to go with to achieve that outcome. Again, back to the shared value exchange, to get to that point is where we need to aim for rather than the transactional day-to-day.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I mean, generally the idea is you're doing the same things as everybody else. You're not special, right? And if you're not special, you've got no competitive advantage. I guess there is a conversation there around the uniqueness of the AI part of the value chain. So what you've said is, yes, you could configure your where you use AI in your processes, and you could also, I don't know if you meant this, but I'm going to add it, right? You can also deploy AI in different ways. So it's, even if you were to say, well, you're going to use it for BA, I'm going to also use it for BA, and we're going to have people do some other bits. How we actually use it could also be different. So we could have something that's very highly trained and specialized on how I have my own talking points and I have my own opinions based on all the things that I've written, all the things that I've said, and all of the, background of my particular way of thinking, versus I could be deeply ingrained in repeatable processes, for example, or we could have our own proprietary method of doing a particular analysis. So all of these things are possible, but we go down this avenue of a force multiplication. The things that I do, I want to magnify those things that make me unique and make me special, rather than doing the same things that everybody else does, which is only good if, there's the if, right? It's only good if we're able to use the tools in a way that is more than just rudimentary. And I have spoken about this a number of times in the last couple of weeks, that many of the conversations that I am drawn into is this first point of discussion, whether it's at a conference, whether it's at a bar, whether it's with a client in a meeting, whether it's on a project. The first point of discussion is usually something like the trough of disillusionment, where we say, well, somebody will say, I used ChatGPT for X. I asked the question and the response that came back wasn't great, so I have to do these things myself. And that always causes doubt from my end, because as many of you will know if you're watching this and using some of the tools and following along some of the previous podcasts, but Dave, you'll know this as well, that if you ask a question and you get a response, the first response is never amazing. You have to work with it. You have to go back and forth. You have to fine tune it. And I don't mean that in a fine tuned model sense. You have to ask further questions. You have to clarify. You have to add information. You have to work with the tools that you have to refine the thing that you want in your way that is special, and that's your expertise. Do you get, this is a question for you, Dave. Do you get a lot of these kinds of first questions that lead to a discussion? What kinds of questions do you usually start a discussion with?
Yeah, so I think you're right on that first point. You'll get a lot of people that will, whether it be GBT or any of the others out there, I went in and I just asked the question. What it came back with, that was rubbish. I'm not going to use that again. But to your point, the first thing is, okay, so be curious. How can you ask it differently? How can you, and it is almost the easiest way I talk to people about, have a conversation with it. If you're talking like we are now, or if you're talking to a mate down the coffee shop or whatever else, you just ask one question, get a response, and go, oh, that was it then, job done. You ask and you refine, and you come to a reasoned endpoint of, okay, that feels like kind of where I thought we were trying to get to. So that's one bit. The second bit is always then going to be around data is a big one, especially a lot of certainly with the larger corporate clients we work with, which is, okay, we're quite worried in our corporate environment of our staff coming in and dropping onto ChatGPT or whatever else and sticking in all sorts of stuff that's actually our company data and we don't know where it's gone. And when it comes back, what can we trust it? Are things secure? What about X, Y, Z? So there's often lots of conversations around that, and where is it appropriate to go out and use the big off-the-shelf solutions versus actually, do you need to be putting something more internal? Do you actually create, if you're new on the journey, you don't want to dispel the innovation in your team or the curiosity in your team, but actually create more of a sandbox environment where they can go, okay, we've created the space for you in our corporate world. In there, you can go and play, but here are the rules. Don't use company data in this way. Play with it so you can understand it. If we can find something that we think's got value to the company, we might then look to go and say, okay, that particular use case or scenario could be of value. Well, let's try and build something along those arms. And that's where you start looking at lots of conversations around end users and LLMs and the big chat GPTs. But actually, what about SLMs? When you talk about, you were saying earlier about your history, you train it on everything that you've done in the past. Well, companies have their own data. How do you train something on your data that is yours and keeps that uniqueness and your competitive advantage without just going out to the open markets? They're probably the three starting points we'd have. If you're brand new to it, find some, I wouldn't say safe necessarily, but managed way, within guardrails where you can encourage people to learn and have a play. I always think, play by learning or learn by play is the way to go, but in a way that doesn't mean your company is going to be on its knees if they dump all your company data out into the world. And the second is, don't stop at the first point of going, okay, it doesn't work. And that I would say is similar to previous technology trends with RPA or anything else that came out. You'd find normally the first use case and it go really well because it would be, you really thought about this one and it might be a finance role or a process or whatever else. Or a lot of these things tend to start in finance, right? Because that is a very transactional 1 + 1 = 2, etc. You put these things in, you go, it's worked great. But then you skip past everything else and you go, right, that's it. It's worked in that one particular use case. We're going to deploy it everywhere. And then you suddenly find, as we're seeing now, let's be honest, if you look at the amount of CIOs currently that are moving on, shall we say, from various roles, because they've spent millions over the last couple of years on AI tools, and they've not thought about what is the actual outcome we want for the company. And that's where I think the conversation gets interesting, because when you talk about AI, it is a technology. And very often, the technology people in a corporate organization don't talk to the HR people, don't talk to the ops people. You have those silos. And very often, the ops guys are, I just need to deliver a thing. I need to deliver it on time. You've got HR and maybe the change teams and the learning people saying, okay, how are people going to use this? What are they going to feel? How's it going to look? And the technology guys are going, this is the latest, greatest thing. It looks fantastic. Let's go with it. And developers will be looking at what's the latest code. Starting the debate across the silos is always where we try and start clients in those conversations.